Wife tried to humiliate me in public, my explosive revenge. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share my life story on Reddit, but here I am. I guess when your world implodes, you look for any outlet to make sense of it all. This isn't a story that happened today, it's been a few months since that fateful night, but the repercussions are still reverberating through every aspect of my life. I'm hoping that by writing this all down, I might gain some clarity, or at least serve as a cautionary tale for others. So, here goes nothing. My name is Daniel, and until recently, I was happily, or so I thought, married to my college sweetheart, Elaine. To understand how we ended up here, I need to take you back to the beginning, back to the fall of 2008 when I first laid eyes on the woman who would become my wife, my best friend, and ultimately, the architect of my public humiliation. I was a sophomore at MIT, buried deep in the world of engineering and mathematics. My days were filled with complex equations, circuit designs, and the quiet hum of computer labs. I was in my element among the logical, the predictable, the quantifiable. People, on the other hand, were a mystery to me. I had a small circle of friends who shared my interests, but beyond that, I was painfully shy and socially awkward. Enter Elaine. She was a transfer student from an art school in New York, vibrant and full of life in a way that seemed almost otherworldly to me. I first saw her in the campus coffee shop, gesticulating wildly as she explained some artistic concept to a group of enthralled listeners. Her curly red hair caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, creating a halo effect that made her look like some kind of fiery angel. I was instantly smitten, and also instantly terrified. It took me weeks to work up the courage to talk to her, and when I finally did, it was because she approached me. I was sitting alone in the coffee shop, poring over a particularly challenging problem set, when a shadow fell across my table. "You know," came a lilting voice, "if you stare at those numbers any harder, they might just get up and dance." I looked up, startled, to find Elaine smiling down at me. Up close, her eyes were a striking green, flecked with gold. I felt my heart stutter in my chest. That would be quite the mathematical anomaly," I managed to stammer out. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Mind if I join you? This place is packed, and you look like you could use a break." Before I could formulate a response, she had already slid into the seat across from me, setting down a sketchpad and a steaming mug of what smelled like chai tea. "I'm Elaine," she said, extending a hand across the table. Her nails were painted a deep blue, flecked with what looked like tiny stars. "Daniel," I replied, taking her hand. "It's nice to meet you." And just like that, my life changed forever. Over the next few weeks, Elaine and I fell into an easy friendship. She was everything I wasn't: outgoing, spontaneous, creative. She saw the world in colors and shapes, in emotions and impressions. Where I saw a problem to be solved, she saw beauty to be captured. Our differences fascinated me. I found myself looking forward to our coffee shop meetings, where she would regale me with stories of her latest art projects or her adventures in the city. In return, I shared with her the elegance I saw in equations, the poetry hidden in lines of code. To my surprise and delight, she seemed genuinely interested. "You see the world so differently," she told me one day, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "It's like you have access to this hidden layer of reality that most people never even know exists." Her words made me feel seen in a way I never had before. For the first time, I didn't feel like my interests made me weird or unapproachable. Elaine had a way of making everyone around her feel special, like they were the most fascinating person in the world. It was intoxicating. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship deepened. We started spending more time together outside of the coffee shop. Elaine dragged me to art galleries and experimental theater performances, opening my eyes to a world of creativity I had never experienced before. In return, I took her stargazing, explaining the constellations and the mathematics behind the movements of the celestial bodies. It was during one of these stargazing sessions, on a crisp autumn night, that everything changed. We were lying on a blanket in a field just outside the city, the Milky Way stretching above us like a river of light. "You know," Elaine said softly, her head resting on my shoulder, "I used to think that science and art were complete opposites. But being with you, I'm starting to see how they're just different languages describing the same beautiful universe." I turned to look at her, my heart pounding. The starlight reflected in her eyes, making them sparkle like the night sky. Before I could overthink it, I leaned in and kissed her. To my amazement and joy, she kissed me back. From that moment on, Elaine and I were inseparable. We were the classic odd couple, the introverted engineer and the extroverted artist. But somehow, we worked. Our differences complemented each other perfectly. Elaine brought color and spontaneity into my structured world, while I provided a steady, grounding presence in her often chaotic life. Our college years flew by in a whirlwind of love, laughter, and shared dreams. We supported each other through late-night study sessions, celebrated each other's successes, and comforted each other through setbacks. Sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to let you know how your support can make a huge difference. By subscribing to this channel, you're not only helping me financially but also enabling me to create even better stories and content for you. Your support directly impacts the quality and quantity of the stories I can bring to life, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for being part of this journey. By the time graduation rolled around, I couldn't imagine my life without Elaine in it. I proposed the night of our graduation. It wasn't a grand, elaborate affair, that wasn't my style, and Elaine knew it. Instead, I took her back to the field where we had our first kiss. I had spent weeks programming a small drone to fly a specific pattern, spelling out, "Will you marry me?" in the night sky using LED lights. When Elaine saw the message appear above us, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, "it's perfect. It's so, you." I got down on one knee, presenting her with a ring I had designed myself, a delicate band of white gold, set with a constellation of tiny diamonds representing the stars on the night we first kissed. "Elaine," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "you've brought so much light and color into my life. Will you do me the honor of continuing to do so for the rest of our lives? Will you marry me?" "Yes," she cried, throwing her arms around me. 1,000 times, yes. As we embraced under the starry sky, I felt like the luckiest man in the world. I had found my other half, the person who completed me in every way. I couldn't wait to start our life together. Little did I know that this moment of pure joy and love would be the high point of our relationship. The years that followed would test us in ways I never could have imagined, ultimately leading to the night that would change everything. As I sit here, reflecting on the early years of our marriage, I'm struck by how quickly time seemed to pass. Those first few years after our wedding were a whirlwind of new experiences, shared dreams, and the exhilarating feeling of building a life together. But they were also marked by the first subtle signs of the cracks that would eventually shatter our relationship. Our wedding was a perfect blend of our personalities. We held it in a renovated, industrial space, a nod to my engineering background, which Elaine transformed into a breathtaking artistic installation. The ceremony took place under a canopy of twinkling lights, reminiscent of our stargazing nights. Elaine's vows were a beautiful, poetic declaration of love that left not a dry eye in the house. In contrast, my vows were a carefully crafted algorithm of promises, each building upon the last to create a formula for a lifetime of happiness. It was quirky, but it was us. After a honeymoon in Japan, where we marveled at the intersection of cutting-edge technology and ancient traditions, we settled into our first apartment together. It was a small, one-bedroom place in Cambridge, close enough to MIT for me to pursue my PhD while working part-time at a tech startup. Elaine took a job at a local gallery, using her spare time to work on her own art. Those first few months of marriage were blissful. We'd spend our evenings exploring our new neighborhood, trying out hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and dreaming about our future. Elaine would often sketch me while I worked on my dissertation, claiming that the look of concentration on my face was too perfect not to capture. I'd help her set up for her first small exhibitions, proud to see her artwork displayed for others to appreciate. But as time went on, the realities of adult life began to set in. My PhD work became increasingly demanding, often keeping me at the lab late into the night. Elaine's job at the gallery was less fulfilling than she'd hoped, with much of her time spent on administrative tasks rather than engaging with art. Money was tight, and the stress began to take its toll. I remember our first big fight. It was over something trivial. I had forgotten to pick up milk on the way home, even though Elaine had reminded me twice. But it quickly escalated into a larger argument about responsibility and consideration. You're always so caught up in your own world, Daniel, Elaine had said, her voice tight with frustration. It's like you can't see anything beyond your equations and your computer screens. Her words stung, partly because I feared they might be true. I had always struggled with being present in the moment, my mind often wandering to complex problems or future plans. I promised to do better, to be more attentive to her needs. For a while, things improved. I made a conscious effort to be more present, to listen more actively when Elaine spoke about her day or her artistic struggles. We started having weekly date nights, taking turns to plan activities that would appeal to both of us. Elaine introduced me to improv classes, which, despite my initial reluctance, helped me become more comfortable in social situations. In return, I taught her the basics of coding, which she incorporated into some of her digital art pieces. It was during this period that I completed my PhD and landed a job at a prestigious engineering firm. The salary was excellent, and suddenly, many of our financial worries evaporated. We moved to a larger apartment, one with a spare room that we converted into a studio for Elaine. I was thrilled to be able to provide her with a dedicated space for her art. Elaine was supportive of my career, attending company events with me and charming my colleagues with her wit and vivacity. But I could sense a growing restlessness in her. While my career was taking off, she was still struggling to make a name for herself in the art world. "I'm happy for you, Daniel, I really am," she said one night after we returned from a company gala where I'd received an award. "But sometimes I feel like I'm just stagnating. Like I'm not living up to my potential." I tried to reassure her, to support her in any way I could. I encouraged her to quit her gallery job and focus full-time on her art, assuring her that we could manage on my salary alone. She was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. For a while, this seemed to reignite her passion. She threw herself into her work, experimenting with new techniques and mediums. Our apartment was constantly filled with the smell of paint and the sound of her favorite indie bands playing as she worked. I loved seeing her so energized, even if it meant coming home to find every surface covered in art supplies. But as the months wore on, I noticed a change in Elaine. Her initial burst of creativity gave way to periods of frustration and self-doubt. She'd spend days working feverishly on a piece, only to declare it garbage and destroy it in a fit of anger. Her mood became increasingly erratic. One day she'd be bubbly and affectionate, the next withdrawn and irritable. I did my best to support her, but I felt increasingly out of my depth. Numbers and logic I could handle, but the turbulent emotions of an artist struggling to find her voice were beyond my comprehension. I suggested therapy, both individual and couples, but Elaine dismissed the idea. "I'm not broken, Daniel," she snapped when I brought it up. "I don't need to be fixed. I just need to break through this creative block." Looking back, I realize this was a crucial moment where I should have pushed harder, should have insisted that we get help. But I was afraid of upsetting her further, of being the overbearing husband who couldn't understand his wife's artistic temperament. So I backed off, hoping that things would improve on their own. They didn't. Elaine's art began to take on a darker tone. Her once vibrant, joyful pieces were replaced by brooding, chaotic works that unsettled me. When I tried to discuss them with her, she accused me of not understanding her artistic vision. "You've always been about order and structure," she said dismissively. "You can't appreciate the beauty in chaos." Her words hurt more than I let on. I had always prided myself on my ability to appreciate her art, even if I didn't always understand it. Now, it felt like she was pushing me away, creating a divide between us based on our different ways of seeing the world. Our conversations became stilted, filled with landmines of potential arguments. Elaine's teasing, once playful and affectionate, took on a sharper edge. She began to make cutting remarks about my social awkwardness, my preference for routine, my boring clothes. At first, I tried to laugh it off, but each comment chipped away at my self-esteem. I threw myself into my work, staying later at the office to avoid the tense atmosphere at home. This, of course, only exacerbated the problem. Elaine accused me of neglecting her, of caring more about my job than our marriage. "You're never here," she'd say when I finally got home. "And even when you are, you're not really present. It's like living with a robot." I wanted to tell her that I was avoiding home because I felt like I was walking on eggshells around her, never sure what would trigger an outburst or a cutting remark. But I couldn't find the words. Communication, once so easy between us, had become a minefield. It was around this time that Elaine reconnected with some of her old art school friends. Suddenly, our apartment was frequently filled with loud, bohemian types who would stay up all night discussing art and philosophy. I felt out of place in my own home, retreating to our bedroom with my laptop while Elaine held court in the living room. One night, I overheard Elaine talking to one of her friends. "I don't know, Zoe," she was saying, her words slightly slurred from wine. "Sometimes I wonder if Daniel and I made a mistake. We're just so different. It's like we're speaking different languages now." Her friend's reply was too low for me to hear, but Elaine's response was clear. "I love him, Ido. But love isn't always enough, is it?" I lay awake that night, Elaine's words echoing in my head. Had we made a mistake? Were our differences, once the very thing that drew us together, now driving us apart? I wanted to talk to her about it, to find a way to bridge the growing gap between us. But every time I tried, the words got stuck in my throat. I was afraid of what I might hear if I pushed too hard, afraid of facing the possibility that our love story might not have the happy ending I'd always envisioned. So I said nothing, and in that silence, the distance between us grew. Little did I know that this period of unspoken tension was merely the calm before the storm. The true test of our relationship was yet to come, in the form of a public humiliation that would push me to my breaking point and lead to actions I never thought myself capable of. As I sit here, trying to put into words the events that led to the ultimate breakdown of my marriage, I'm struck by how a series of small moments can accumulate into something so devastating. It's like watching a dam break. What starts as a tiny crack eventually gives way to a flood that destroys everything in its path. The period leading up to the infamous company gala was marked by an increasing sense of disconnection between Elaine and me. Our conversations, once flowing and vibrant, had become perfunctory exchanges about household chores and schedules. The silences between us grew longer and more uncomfortable. I found myself working later and later, telling myself it was because of increased responsibilities at work, but deep down, I knew I was avoiding the tension at home. Elaine's art had taken a decidedly abstract turn. Our apartment was filled with large canvases splattered with dark, brooding colors. When I tried to engage her about her work, she'd give vague, dismissive answers. "You wouldn't understand," became her common refrain, each time driving the wedge between us a little deeper. I remember one particular evening, about a month before the gala. I had come home early, hoping to surprise Elaine with dinner from her favorite Thai restaurant. I found her in her studio, surrounded by empty wine bottles, furiously attacking a canvas with broad strokes of deep red paint. "Elaine," I called out hesitantly. "I brought dinner." She whirled around, her eyes wild and unfocused. "Daniel," she said, her voice slurring slightly. "Come to check on your little wife. Make sure she's not making too much of a mess." I just thought we could have dinner together," I stammered, taken aback by her hostility. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that bore no resemblance to the musical laughter I'd fallen in love with. "Dinner? How domestic. How utterly boring." Her words stung, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "Elaine, I think maybe we should talk. Things haven't been great between us lately, and I." "Talk?" she interrupted. "What's there to talk about, Daniel? You live in your world of numbers and logic, and I live in mine. We're like parallel lines, destined never to intersect." "That's not true," I protested. "We've always been different, but that's what made us work. We balanced each other out." She turned back to her canvas, picking up a brush. "Balance," she muttered. "Maybe I'm tired of being balanced. Maybe I want to be unbalanced, chaotic, free." I stood there, the takeout bags growing heavy in my hands, feeling more lost than ever. "I love you, Elaine," I said quietly. She didn't turn around. "I know," she replied, her voice soft and sad. "But sometimes I wonder if that's enough anymore." I left the food on the kitchen counter and retreated to our bedroom, my appetite gone. That night, Elaine didn't come to bed. I found her the next morning, passed out on the couch, flecks of paint in her hair and on her clothes. As the date of the company gala approached, I found myself both dreading and hoping for the event. Part of me hoped that getting dressed up and going out might rekindle some of the spark between us. Another part feared that putting Elaine in a social situation with my colleagues would only highlight how far apart we'd grown. The day of the gala arrived. I came home early to get ready, my new tuxedo hanging in its garment bag. To my surprise, I found Elaine already dressed, looking stunning in an emerald green gown that complemented her red hair perfectly. Wow, I breathed. You look beautiful. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Elaine in her smile. Thanks, she said. You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Engineer. As we got ready, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this night out was exactly what we needed. Maybe, away from the pressures of work and art, we could remember why we fell in love in the first place. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room, the light glinting off the champagne flutes and the sequined dresses of the attendees. I felt a surge of pride as we entered, Elaine on my arm. Despite our problems, we still made a striking couple. For the first hour or so, things went well. Elaine charmed my colleagues with her wit and vivacity, while I made the rounds, discussing ongoing projects and potential new contracts. I kept glancing over at Elaine, my heart swelling each time I saw her laugh or gesture animatedly as she spoke. It was during a conversation with Mr. Thompson, the CEO, that things began to unravel. I was in the middle of explaining a new project I was spearheading when I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to see Elaine, her cheeks flushed and her eyes overly bright. Too late, I realized she must have been hitting the champagne pretty hard. Oh, honey, she said, her voice carrying in a way that made several nearby conversations pause. Are you boring Mr. Thompson with your technical jargon again? I felt my face grow hot. Elaine, but she wasn't finished. You know, she stage whispered to Mr. Thompson, though her whisper was easily audible to those around us. He's brilliant with machines but hopeless with people. Last week, he congratulated our neighbor on her pregnancy. She's not pregnant. A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd that had gathered. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. Mr. Thompson looked uncomfortable, clearly unsure how to respond. Elaine, I said quietly, trying to guide her away. Maybe we should get some air. She shrugged off my hand. Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud, Daniel. I'm just having a little fun. Isn't that what these events are for? Or is fun not allowed in your world of spreadsheets and circuit boards? The laughter grew louder. I saw pity in some eyes, amusement in others. My colleagues, people I'd hoped to impress, were now looking at me like I was a joke. And don't get me started on his fashion sense, Elaine continued, tugging at my bow tie. I had to dress him tonight. Left to his own devices, he'd probably show up in socks and sandals. Each word felt like a physical blow. Years of insecurities came rushing back, memories of being the awkward kid in school, always on the outside looking in. But now it wasn't schoolyard bullies making fun of me. It was my wife, the person who was supposed to love and support me, laying bare all my flaws for my colleagues to see. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I mumbled some excuse and fled, finding myself on a balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air helped clear my head, but it did nothing to soothe each in my chest. How had we come to this? The woman who had once looked at me like I hung the moon was now publicly mocking me. The differences that had once fascinated her were now sources of derision. I felt humiliated, angry, and profoundly sad. I'm not sure how long I stood there, but eventually, I heard the balcony door open behind me. I turned, half expecting, hoping, even, to see Elaine, coming to apologize. Instead, it was Sarah from HR, her face a mask of concern. Daniel, she said gently, are you okay? I tried to smile, but I'm sure it came out as more of a grimace. I'm fine, I lied. Just needed some air. Sarah stepped closer, laying a hand on my arm. What Elaine did in there, it wasn't right. You didn't deserve that. Her kindness nearly undid me. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes and blinked hard, determined not to break down in front of a colleague. Thanks, I managed to say. I should probably get back inside. Sarah nodded, but before I could move past her, she spoke again. Daniel, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you deserve better. The way she spoke to you, about you, that's not how someone treats a person they love and respect. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, because deep down, I knew she was right. Whatever problems we were having, Elaine's behavior tonight had crossed a line. The public humiliation, the cruel jokes at my expense, this wasn't the act of someone who loved me. This was the act of someone who resented me, who perhaps even despised me. I mumbled another thank you to Sarah and made my way back into the ballroom. Elaine was nowhere to be seen. I made my apologies to Mr. Thompson and a few other key colleagues, then called for our car. I found Elaine in the hotel lobby, slumped in an armchair, her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled. When she saw me, she struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. "There you are," she slurred. "Ready to go home, Mr. Boring." The drive home was silent. Elaine fell asleep against the window, while I stared straight ahead, my mind a whirlwind of hurt, anger, and a growing sense of resolve. Something had to change. We couldn't go on like this. As we entered our apartment, Elaine stumbled to the bathroom, the sounds of retching following soon after. I should have felt concern, should have gone to hold her hair back and make sure she was okay. Instead, I felt a cold detachment. I changed out of my tuxedo and sat on the edge of our bed, waiting. When Elaine finally emerged, she looked pale and disheveled, the glamorous woman from the start of the evening long gone. "Daniel," she began, her voice hoarse. Don't," I interrupted, surprised by the hardness in my voice. "Just don't, Elaine. I can't hear any more of your words tonight." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Are you?" I asked. "Are you really sorry, or are you just sorry you made a fool of yourself in front of all those people?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "Fair?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to humiliate me in front of my colleagues? To mock me for the very things about myself that I'm most insecure about? Tell me, Elaine, where's the fairness in that?" She sank down onto the bed, her head in her hands. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she sobbed. "I'm so unhappy, Daniel. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to save myself." Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take her in my arms and tell her we'd figure it out together. But a larger part, the part still smarting from the public humiliation, held back. "I think," I said slowly, "that we need some time apart. This isn't working, Elaine. We're hurting each other, and I don't know how to fix it." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you leaving me?" I shook my head. "No. But I am going to sleep in the spare room tonight. And tomorrow, I think we need to have a serious conversation about our future. About whether we have a future together." As I gathered a pillow and a blanket, Elaine's sobs followed me out of the room. I closed the door to the spare room behind me, leaned against it, and finally allowed my own tears to fall. That night, as I lay sleepless in the unfamiliar bed, my mind raced with thoughts of revenge. I imagined ways to hurt Elaine as deeply as she had hurt me. It scared me, the darkness of these thoughts, the depth of my anger and pain. Little did I know that in the coming days, this seed of vengeance would grow into an act that would change both our lives forever. The morning after the gala dawned gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the heavy atmosphere in our apartment. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the events of the previous night in an endless, tortuous loop. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed of the spare room, I could hear Elaine moving around in the kitchen, the clinking of cups and the gurgle of the coffee maker a poor imitation of our once comfortable domestic routine. I steeled myself before leaving the room, unsure of what to expect. Would Elaine be contrite, defensive, or would she act as if nothing had happened, sweeping last night's events under the rug as she had done with so many of our issues lately? As I entered the kitchen, I found Elaine sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She looked up as I entered, and I was struck by how small and vulnerable she appeared. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her usually vibrant hair limp and tangled. For a moment, I felt a surge of sympathy, but it was quickly quashed by the memory of her cruel words at the gala. "Daniel," she began, her voice hoarse. I don't know where to start." I poured myself a cup of coffee, buying time as I gathered my thoughts. "How about with an explanation?" I finally said, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. "What the hell happened last night, Elaine?" She flinched at my tone, her eyes dropping to the table. "I messed up," she whispered. "I messed up so badly, Daniel. I don't know what came over me. The champagne, the crowd. I just felt so out of place, so insignificant next to all your successful colleagues." And then I saw you talking to the CEO, looking so confident and in your element, and I snapped. I sat down across from her, my coffee untouched. So you decided to tear me down. To humiliate me in front of the very people I was trying to impress. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know it's no excuse, but I've been feeling so lost lately. My art isn't progressing, I feel like I'm stagnating while you're moving forward in your career. I guess I wanted to feel powerful for a moment, even if it meant hurting you. God, that sounds awful when I say it out loud. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had known she was struggling, but I hadn't realized the depth of her unhappiness, or how it had twisted her feelings towards me. Elaine, I said slowly, I think we need help. Professional help. This isn't just about last night. We've been drifting apart for a while now, and I don't know how to fix it on our own. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. You're right. I think I need to see someone individually too. I don't like the person I'm becoming, Daniel. I don't recognize myself anymore. We spent the next few hours talking more openly than we had in months. It was painful, laying bare all the resentments and fears that had been festering between us. But it was also cathartic, like lancing a wound to let the poison out. By the end of our conversation, we had a plan. We would both start individual therapy, and we would find a couples counselor as well. Elaine agreed to cut back on her drinking, acknowledging that it had become a crutch for her in dealing with her creative frustrations. I promised to make more of an effort to engage with her art and her social circle, to try and bridge the gap that had grown between us. For a few weeks, it seemed like things were improving. We were both putting in effort, trying to rebuild the connection we had lost. Our therapy sessions were challenging but illuminating, forcing us to confront issues we had long ignored. But as the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. About a month after the gala incident, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise Elaine with takeout from her favorite restaurant. As I approached our apartment door, I could hear voices inside, Elaine's, and a man's I didn't recognize. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, as Elaine's words drifted through the door. I don't know, Jake. Daniel's trying, he really is. But sometimes I wonder if we're just too different. If we've grown too far apart. The man, Jake, replied, his voice low and intimate in a way that made my stomach churn. You deserve to be happy, Elaine. You deserve someone who understands your passion, who can challenge you creatively. There was a pause, and then Elaine spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, but I made a commitment to Daniel. I can't just throw that away. Can't you? Jake's voice was closer now, and I could picture him moving towards Elaine. Life's too short to stay in a situation that makes you unhappy. You're an artist, Elaine. You need freedom, spontaneity. Can Daniel really give you that? I'd heard enough. I pushed open the door, the takeout bags dropping from my suddenly numb fingers. Elaine and Jake sprang apart, guilt-ridden all over their faces. Jake was tall and lean, with the kind of artfully disheveled look that I could never pull off. An artist, clearly, probably one of Elaine's old school friends. Daniel, Elaine exclaimed, her face pale. You're home early. I looked from her to Jake and back again, a cold fury building in my chest. Clearly, I said, my voice eerily calm. Am I interrupting something? Jake had the decency to look embarrassed. I should go, he muttered, grabbing his jacket. He paused as he passed me, opening his mouth as if to say something, but seemed to think better of it when he saw the look in my eyes. As the door closed behind Jake, Elaine and I stood in silence, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging heavy between us. It's not what you think, Elaine finally said, her voice small. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Really? Because what I think is that I just walked in on my wife having an intimate conversation with another man about how unhappy she is in our marriage. Please, enlighten me on what I'm misunderstanding here. Elaine sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. Jake is just a friend, she said. We were talking, that's all. I've been confused, struggling with my feelings, and he's been a good listener. A good listener, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. And I suppose the fact that he was about to kiss you when I walked in was just friendly support. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. Nothing happened, Daniel. But maybe the fact that I wanted something to happen says more about our marriage than I want to admit. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, groping for the wall to steady myself. So that's it? I asked, my voice breaking. After everything we've been through, after all the promises we made to each other, you're ready to throw it all away for some artistic connection with this Jake? Elaine stood up, reaching out to me, but I flinched away from her touch. I don't know what I want anymore, Daniel, she said, tears streaming down her face. I love you, Ido. But I'm not happy. I feel like I'm suffocating, like I'm losing myself in this life we've built. And I don't know how to fix it. I felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. All our years together, all our shared dreams and promises, seemed to be dissolving before my eyes. I think, I said slowly, each word feeling like it was being torn from my throat, that I need to leave. I can't be here right now. I turned and walked out of the apartment, ignoring Elaine's pleas for me to stay, to talk it out. I wandered the streets for hours, my mind a whirlwind of pain, anger, and betrayal. When I finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, Elaine was asleep on the couch, tear tracks visible on her cheeks. The next few weeks were a blur of tense silences and stilted conversations. We continued our therapy sessions, but they felt hollow now, tainted by the knowledge of Elaine's emotional, if not physical, infidelity. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office to avoid coming home to an apartment that no longer felt like a sanctuary. It was during this time that the seed of revenge, planted the night of the gala, began to grow and take root in my mind. I found myself fantasizing about ways to hurt Elaine as deeply as she had hurt me. I knew these thoughts were toxic, destructive, but I couldn't seem to shake them. The opportunity for revenge presented itself about 2 months after the incident with Jake. Elaine had been working tirelessly on a new series of paintings for a prestigious gallery showing. It was her big break, a chance to finally establish herself in the art world. She had poured her heart and soul into these pieces, each one a raw, emotional exploration of our fractured relationship. I remember the day it all came to a head. I had come home early again, a habit I'd developed since the Jake incident. Elaine was out, probably at her studio putting the finishing touches on her paintings. As I moved through our apartment, my eyes fell on her sketchbook, left open on the coffee table. Curious, I picked it up, flipping through the pages. What I saw made my blood run cold. Page after page of sketches and notes, all centered around Jake. There were intimate portraits, lovingly rendered in Elaine's skilled hand. Notes in the margins spoke of a deep emotional connection, of shared artistic vision and passion. But it was the last page that broke me. A sketch of Jake and Elaine, wrapped in an embrace, with the words, "What if?" scrawled beneath. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the betrayal of the past months coalesced into a white-hot rage. Without fully realizing what I was doing, I found myself gathering up all of Elaine's finished paintings for her upcoming show. I took them out to our small backyard, arranging them in a macabre display. Then I went to the garage and found a can of spray paint. As I stood there, poised to destroy months of Elaine's work, a small voice in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop, to think about what I was doing. But the roar of betrayal and anger drowned it out. I had just finished defacing the first painting when I heard a gasp behind me. I turned to see Elaine standing there, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What have you done?" As I stood there, spray can in hand, staring at the devastation I had wrought, the full weight of my actions came crashing down on me. In my quest for revenge, I had become the very thing I despised. I had struck out at Elaine in the cruelest way possible, attacking the thing she held most dear, her art. The look of utter betrayal and heartbreak on Elaine's face will haunt me for the rest of my days. In that moment, I knew that whatever chance we had of salvaging our marriage was gone. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What followed was a whirlwind of consequences. Elaine left that night, unable to even look at me. I received a call from her lawyer the next day, informing me that she was filing for divorce and considering pressing charges for destruction of property. My company got wind of the incident, and I was placed on indefinite leave pending an investigation. Colleagues who had once respected me now looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. I had become a pariah, a cautionary tale of a man who let his anger and hurt drive him to unforgivable acts. As I sit here now, in an empty apartment that once held so much love and promise, I'm left to grapple with the consequences of my actions. I've lost my wife, my job is hanging by a thread, and I'm facing potential legal repercussions. But more than that, I've lost respect for myself. In my quest for revenge, I became someone I never thought I could be. If there's a lesson to be learned from this sorry tale, it's this: revenge may seem sweet in the moment, but the pain of betrayal is real and valid, but allowing it to corrupt you, to turn you into someone capable of such cruelty, is a far greater tragedy. I don't know what the future holds for me now. I'm in therapy, trying to understand how I could have let things go so far, how I could have become so lost in my pain that I was capable of such a destructive act. I know that I have a long road ahead of me in terms of making amends and rebuilding my life. As for Elaine, I hope that someday she can find it in her heart to forgive me, even if she can never forget what I've done. I hope she finds the happiness and artistic fulfillment she was seeking, even if it's not with me. And I hope that our story can serve as a warning to others about the destructive power of unchecked resentment and the importance of addressing issues in a relationship before they fester and grow into something uncontrollable. In the end, we were two people who loved each other deeply but lost sight of that love amidst our own insecurities and resentments. Our story is a tragedy of miscommunication, of dreams deferred, and of the devastating consequences of letting pain turn to anger and anger to vengeance. As I close this chapter of my life, I'm left with nothing but regret and a determination to become a better person. I can only hope that by sharing my story, others might learn from my mistakes and choose a path of understanding and forgiveness, rather than one of revenge and destruction. Sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to let you know how your support can make a huge difference. By subscribing to this channel, you're not only helping me financially but also enabling me to create even better stories and content for you. Your support directly impacts the quality and quantity of the stories I can bring to life, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for being part of this journey.